Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the show that takes a huge stack of sources, distills the knowledge, and turns it into the most potent shot of insight you'll get all week.
Today, we are plugging in and turning up the volume on a true musical giant, John Lee Hooker.
He's not just a foundational figure in American music, he is arguably the single most important bridge connecting that raw acoustic tradition of the Mississippi Delta blues to the loud, electric driving rhythm of modern rock and roll.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the sources we've gathered, they just paint this incredible picture of his journey. I mean, it's a massive story.
It really is.
We're tracking him from the deepest poverty of a sharecropper existence in rural Mississippi, a life defined by, strict religious prohibition on secular music.
Right, the devil's music.
Exactly. All the way through to his late career renaissance, where he's collaborating with giants of rock, finding global commercial success, and finally receiving the accolades and wealth he had been denied for decades.
The story of John Lee Hooker is just the ultimate study in American contradictions. He was the master of that hypnotic, unique, driving rhythm boogie style. A sound so simple and repetitive, yet so incredibly powerful, it became the template for countless musicians who followed him. Our sources, they really underscore his profound, lasting impact.
Yeah, the numbers speak for themselves.
They do. He was ranked 35th in Rolling Stone's 2015 list of the 100 greatest guitarists, and he's consistently cited as one of the greatest male blues vocalists of all time. It's just hard to overstate his foundational role.
And what's truly fascinating when you dig into the sources is that his entire musical identity was an electric adaptation of a very specific, deeply rooted Delta sound. But, and this is the key, it was a sound that wasn't actually common in the Delta at the time.
Okay, so he's an outlier from the very beginning.
Completely. He took that raw, droning intensity and fused it with the industrialized electric energy of the northern cities, specifically Detroit.
So our mission today is to really delve into the specifics of this deeply complex life. We're going to need to dissect the ongoing and frankly fascinating controversy over his actual birth year.
Right.
Because that date discrepancy, it fundamentally alters the historical context of his entire youth. We'll also examine the real financial reason he was compelled to use nearly a dozen different pseudonyms just to keep working and survive.
The survival tactic, really.
Absolutely. And maybe most entertaining, we'll explore the almost unbelievable story of how his totally unique, his idiosyncratic timing forced him to rely on a simple wooden palette as his rhythm section for some of his biggest, most influential records.
It's a true deep dive into the legend of the boogeyman. And to begin, we have to start at the beginning, which, fittingly, remains a bit of a mystery.
For a man whose voice and guitar were instantly recognizable across the globe, it is just astonishing how much confusion surrounds his earliest days, especially his actual date of birth.
It really is.
Our sources show this isn't some small disagreement over a year or two. We're talking about an 11-year chronological chasm.
That's the challenge for any historian trying to pin down the details of that era, the Great Migration era. You have records, but they're not always consistent. And for Hooker, we have a dizzying array of suggested birth years floating around. 1912, 1915, 1917, 1920, and even 1923.
And that range, it's not just trivia, it fundamentally changes the context of his life, his early influences, and his relationship to the Delta landscape.
Absolutely. Think about it. When did he hear his first blues song? How old was he during the Great Depression? It all shifts.
Historically, if you look at, album liner notes and widely accepted biographies, 1917 became the standard. It's the date you see most often.
Right, that's the one that kind of stuck.
It stuck. And Hooker himself, he often stated 1920, which, maybe he was trying to shave a few years off his age later in life. That wasn't uncommon for performers.
Not at all.
We even have evidence from our sources that a whole series of events were held in 2017 to celebrate the supposed centenary of his birth, which really cemented that 1917 date in popular culture.
But this is a classic case where historical documentation, it just triumphs over anecdotal evidence or celebrity claims. The hard facts, they come from the United States Federal Census records.
Okay, so the paper trail tells a different story.
A very different story. Researchers digging through the 1920 and 1930 censuses found data that strongly, and I mean strongly, indicates he was actually born in 1912.
Let's nail down that critical piece of census evidence because that's a huge claim. What exactly does the 1920 census tell us that makes the 1912 date so much more credible?
Okay, so the 1920 census explicitly lists John Hooker as being 7 years old, living with William and Minnie Hooker in Tutwiler, Mississippi.
So that's
his parents. Now, Census Day in 1920 was January 1st, and the census itself was conducted throughout early February. So if he was 7 years old at that specific time, and we accept his lifelong claim that his birthday was in August.
Then he wouldn't have had his birthday yet in 1920.
Exactly. So he would have turned 8 later that year, which means the only logical year of birth is 1912. The later dates, 1917, 1920, they simply do not align with that specific official record.
So if 1912 is the most likely date, let's talk about why that matters so much. I mean, it seems like historical trivia, but the implications for understanding his story are massive.
It changes everything about his coming-of-age story, everything. If he was born in 1920, he was a very young child, only 8 years old, when his parents separated and he gained his blues-playing stepfather, William Moore.
Okay.
More critically, if he ran away from home at 14, as the legend holds, the 1920 birth date would mean he ran away in 1934. That puts him firmly into the heart of the Depression and much closer to the outbreak of World War II.
But if he was born in 1912, running away at 14 means he left home around 1926 or 1927. That's a different world.
Precisely. That 1912 date anchors him much more firmly in the pre-Great Migration era and the deep, rural, unelectrified South. He would have witnessed a different generation of blues music. He would have endured the absolute peak of the sharecropper system before the major demographic shifts began.
So the 1912 date gives his experiences of isolation, of poverty, and his eventual escape far greater historical weight and context.
It does. The blues he carried with him would be the deep, raw Delta tradition from an earlier period, rather than the slightly more modern sounds that were available in the 1930s.
That reframing, it really helps us understand the true beginning of his legend. So based on that census evidence, let's establish those roots in Mississippi. Where was he exactly?
He was likely born in Tallahatchie County, near Tutwiler, though some sources suggest it might have been closer to Clarksdale in Coahoma County.
Yeah.
But either way, this area of the Delta was the absolute epicenter of American blues music.
But also of extreme agricultural poverty.
Yes. And he was the youngest of 11 children.
11. And his parents' background, it paints a very specific picture of life in the Delta at that time. His father, William Hooker, was a sharecropper, meaning they worked on land owned by others, and he was also a Baptist preacher.
A powerful combination of roles in that community.
Absolutely. And his mother, Minnie Ramsey, was about a decade younger than her husband, whom she married young.
And the sources, they really emphasize the strict environment they created. William Hooker was a deeply religious man. The children were homeschooled, and they were only permitted to listen to religious songs, spirituals.
And no blues.
No blues. The very notion of secular music was banned in that household. Their earliest musical exposure was through the church choir and spirituals. This is the context that makes his later life so dramatic, the absolute pivot to the blues.
And that narrative shift, it comes pretty quickly. It's tied to a family breakdown that ultimately introduces John Lee to the secular music he'd become famous for.
That's right. Around 1921 or 1922, his parents separated. Shortly after that, in 1922, Minnie Ramsey married a man named William Moore.
And this is the crucial pivot point.
This is everything. William Moore was a blues singer, essentially introducing the forbidden fruit directly into John Lee's life.
And Moore didn't just sing the blues. He was the person who provided John Lee with his first real introduction to the guitar. Hooker would later credit him for his signature, distinctive playing style. This is where we need to get into the technical details. What made William Moore's style so unique and so foundational for John Lee Hooker?
This is the real insight into Hooker's genius. The Delta blues of that time, think of Charlie Patton or Son House. It often involved complex, syncopated, ragtime-influenced fingerpicking. It was technically demanding, highly rhythmic music.
Right, a lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts. William Moore, however, he learned his craft in Shreveport, Louisiana. And there he played a style that's described in the sources as a droning one-chord blues.
A droning one-chord blues. Okay, what does that actually sound like compared to the standard Delta style?
It's hypnotic. It's almost primal. It minimizes harmonic changes. So instead of moving through the typical 12-bar blues chords, the IVV progression, he often stayed locked on that conic chord, the root.
Just hammering on one chord.
Hammering on it, focusing on a deep, repetitive, mesmerizing rhythm that created this almost trance-like effect. Our sources explicitly state this style was strikingly different from the Delta blues prominent in Mississippi at the time.
So he's not learning complexity, he's learning simplification and modal power.
That is the essential takeaway. Hooker didn't learn the sophisticated technique of his Delta neighbors. He learned this unique, simplified, deeply rhythmic drone from his stepfather, that droning sound, that repetitive insistence that became the foundation for his electric boogie.
And there was a second major influence right after that, wasn't there?
Yes, a man named Tony Hollins. Hollins dated Hooker's sister, Alice. He wasn't just a friend. He actively encouraged the young John Lee, helped teach him to play, and very importantly, gave him his first guitar.
That's a huge moment. And Hollins was formative in providing material too, right? He taught Hooker versions of songs that would later become staples of the John Lee Hooker canon.
Absolutely. Songs like Crawling King Snake and the Immortal Catfish Blues, it really highlights how quickly Hooker absorbed and synthesized these unique blues styles. The music was being passed down through this immediate, visceral, familial path, just ready for his own adaptation.
This intense learning period, though, it ended very abruptly. By the age of 14, so around 1926 or 1927, if we trust the 1912 census, Hooker ran away from home.
He did, and the sources paint a really poignant picture. They suggest he never saw his mother or his stepfather again. This was a true, clean break from his past and the start of a life that would be defined by constant movement.
It really speaks to the desperation of life in the Delta and just the lure of the road. I mean, running away at 14, especially in that era, meant a life of incredible hardship and isolation.
Moving between odd jobs and relying entirely on his guitar to get by.
He spent the mid-1930s in Memphis, Tennessee, which is such a crucial transitional city. He's performing on Beale Street, the legendary hub of black commerce and entertainment.
Beale Street was his performing laboratory. It's where he honed his craft. He played at places like the New Daisy Theater and at countless house parties. This allowed him to sharpen his stage presence and adapt that droning style to an urban audience,
Preparing him for the biggest move of his life.
the migration north to the industrial cities, fueled by the war effort.
John Lee Hooker's trajectory is just a perfect reflection of the Great Migration. You have millions of African Americans leaving the South seeking better economic opportunities, and he's right there in the middle of it.
He worked in factories in various cities during World War II, a time of massive industrial output. But he eventually settled in Detroit in 1943. Detroit offered something he couldn't get in the South: high-paying, reliable factory work.
So he trades the uncertainty of the sharecropper life for the monotony of the assembly line. He gets a job at the Ford Motor Company.
A steady paycheck. But that experience, the sound of the massive machines, the repetitive industrial rhythm, that certainly shaped the environment in which his music evolved.
And once he was settled, he immediately sought out the local music scene. He started congregating in the blues clubs and bars on Hastings Street, which was the heart of the black entertainment district at the time.
It was the place to be.
And here's where a crucial detail about Detroit's musical landscape directly benefited him. It's a bit of a historical accident, really.
Well, Detroit in the 1940s was known primarily for its powerful pianists. Boogie Woogie was huge, and the city's blues scene was just dominated by keyboard players.
But guitar players, especially those playing that deep solo Delta style, were surprisingly scarce.
They were, so this created a perfect opening for him.
That's a great question, though. If Detroit was dominated by pianists playing the complex, 8-to-the-bar boogie woogie, why didn't Hooker try to adapt his style to fit that existing sound? Why didn't he, try to find a piano player to back him?
And that's a key point, and it speaks to the stubborn, unique quality of his music. He couldn't adapt, and the pianist couldn't follow him.
Why not?
His rhythm, which we're going to get into in more detail, it was not conducive to the strict meter required by Boogie Woogie. So because guitar players were rare, his distinctive droning sound gained popularity rapidly in those local clubs.
Yeah.
He had a sonic niche just waiting for him.
But he also realized he had a major problem.
A big one.
The problem being volume. The acoustic guitar that suited the quiet Delta porches and house parties just couldn't compete with the noise of a crowded, industrialized city club.
Exactly. I mean, you can just picture it. All the people talking, the noise from the street, he was getting drowned out.
So to amplify his sound and match the energy of the urban scene, he bought his first electric guitar.
And that shift wasn't just aesthetic. It was a practical necessity. Purely practical. The electric guitar allowed him to maintain that singular, hypnotic drone, but with a raw, amplified power that could define a room. This adoption of electricity is the moment the boogeyman truly merges the rural past with the urban future.
And his professional career took off almost immediately after this technological leap. He was still working as a janitor in the Detroit steel mill when his recording career began in 1948.
And it launched with a bang. He recorded a demo for a local Detroit producer named Bernie Besman. That demo got picked up by Modern Records in Los Angeles, and the single Boogie Chillin' was released.
And it wasn't just a hit, it was huge.
It was an instant, massive commercial success. It became the best-selling race record of 1949.
We should probably pause here and just clarify that term race record for anyone who might not know. It's a very historically specific term.
It is. In the 1940s, race records was the industry term for recordings marketed specifically to African-American audiences. It covered gospel, blues, and early R&B.
So for Boogie Chillin' to be the best-selling record in this entire category in 1949, that meant Hooker had truly captured the sound of the moment for Black America. It was a spectacular debut.
It really was. And here is that second major contradiction our sources highlight. Despite being illiterate, Hooker was an incredibly prolific lyricist. His creative output was constant.
That's the beauty of the oral tradition, isn't it? He wasn't constrained by written scores or formal compositional structure.
Not at all. He was constantly adapting traditional lyrics and composing original songs in his head, relying purely on memory and emotion. His genius was immediate and unmediated.
But that genius, that very specific genius, created a profound technical hurdle for anyone trying to record him. Which brings us to the famous problem of his rhythm, or maybe his lack of adherence to standard rhythm.
This is the crux of John Lee Hooker's musical DNA. He was fundamentally opposed to the constraints of standardized meter. He rarely played to a strict 44 beat or a defined 12-bar structure. His rhythm was fluid.
What do you mean by fluid?
He adjusted the tempo entirely to fit his vocal phrasing and the emotional intensity of the song. If he held a note longer, the beat would wait for him.
That makes perfect sense for a solo performer from the Delta. Your voice is the ultimate guide and the guitar just follows. But it makes collaboration impossible in a standard studio setting. Why couldn't other musicians follow him?
Because typical blues or jazz musicians, they rely on a fixed structure, a rigid rhythmic frame. It's how they anticipate changes. If you try to back John Lee Hooker, the beat might stretch for an extra half second or contract for a quarter second, all depending on when he decided to breathe or deliver the next phrase.
You'd get lost.
You'd quickly find yourself completely out of sync with his personal musical clock. You'd be guessing where the downbeat is, and you'd usually be wrong.
So when the producer Bernie Besman recorded those critical early solo songs, including Boogie Chillin', what was the brilliant, low-tech solution to creating a rhythm track?
The solution was pure resourceful necessity. They set up the microphone to capture Hooker playing his electric guitar, singing, and simultaneously stomping on a wooden pallet to create a rudimentary rhythm track.
Stomping on a wooden pallet, that's incredible.
It is. The pallet acted as his drummer. But crucially, it was a drummer controlled entirely by his internal, non-standard tempo. Every stomp was perfectly in time with his own fluid rhythm.
That is an unbelievable detail. The very rhythm that drove Boogie Chillin' to the top of the charts, that driving, primal, almost unsettling beat, was literally John Lee Hooker stomping on a piece of wood.
It was an early, organic, customized drum machine programmed entirely by his emotional clock.
It just underscores how unique his music was. It wasn't just a style. It was an innate, physical, rhythmic expression that defied all the formal musical rules. That wooden pallet is an essential, if invisible, piece of blues history.
And it represents the moment the industrialized electric guitar found its perfect, primitive percussionist.
And while that palette allowed him to succeed musically and establish his sound, even that success couldn't shield him from the cruel financial realities of the 1950s music industry. This forced him into a completely different kind of hiding, which really defines the next era of his career.
Yeah, the success of Boogie Chillin' secured him an exclusive contract with Modern Records. The problem was, like most black musicians of the era, he earned very, very little from actual record sales royalties.
So the money wasn't in the hits.
No. The real money, the money he needed to live on, was the small, upfront session fee paid by producers to get him into the studio.
And if he had an exclusive contract, he technically couldn't record for anyone else. But he needed those session fees to live. This created a profound conflict: professional loyalty versus personal survival.
And survival won, and wisely so. To maximize his income, he was constantly recording new variations of his songs or entirely new material for different studios. But to evade the binding terms of his contract, specifically that exclusive deal with Modern, he was forced to adopt an entire arsenal of false identities.
The necessity of economic survival created some of the most memorable personas in blues history. This is where the story gets almost farcical. What were some of the names he used, and which labels were they trying to fool?
The list is extraordinary. It just illustrates the high-stakes game of hide-and-seek he was playing across the record store shelves. He recorded as John Lee Booker for Chess Records and Chance Records between 1951 and 1952.
Okay, Booker. Close, but different.
Right. He was Johnny Lee for Deluxe Records in 1953 and 1954. Then you get the more colorful, less plausible aliases.
Let's hear them.
Texas Slim, Delta John. My personal favorite, Birmingham Sam and his magic guitar.
Birmingham Sam and his magic guitar, the sheer audacity of that one is incredible.
It is. And there was also Johnny Williams and John Lee Cooker.
Cooker, not Hooker.
Cooker. And of course, the one nickname that stuck from all of this was the Boogie Man.
It speaks to the desperation and just the chaos of the early recording industry. Was the strategy effective? I mean, did he actually confuse the record labels?
Often enough to keep recording, yes. These different names allowed his signature droning style to saturate the market on competing labels. So if a record company wanted that new boogie chillin' sound, they could license a track from Texas Slim without realizing they were feeding the same artist who was contractually bound to modern records.
It's a remarkable story of an artist using anonymity as a commercial tool just to reclaim some basic economic control.
Exactly.
This chaos, though, it eventually stabilized when he signed with VJ Records in Chicago. This move marks a major shift because VJ provided something that modern records often didn't.
Consistent professional studio accompaniment.
Right.
The shift to VJ was a technical and creative evolution. For his later sessions there, he finally started working consistently with backing musicians who could actually make the collaboration work. This meant moving beyond the solo guitar and the wooden palette.
And the key to unlocking that ensemble sound, as our sources point out, was a guitarist named Eddie Taylor. What made Taylor so crucial?
Taylor was one of those extremely rare musicians who could understand and adapt to Hooker's musical idiosyncrasies. He didn't fight it. Instead of trying to force Hooker into a rigid 44 time, Taylor learned to listen and follow Hooker's vocal cues and tempo shifts.
So he was the anchor.
He became the anchor that allowed Hooker's natural rhythm to be expressed through a full band. This collaboration moved Hooker's sound from a raw solo artist to a driving electric ensemble force.
And this professional partnership led directly to the creation of two of his most popular and commercially enduring hits.
Absolutely. The defining songs of the VJ era were Boom Boom, released in 1962, and Dimples, which came out in 1956. These tracks added a rhythmic complexity and a driving energy to his sound. They proved that his boogie could translate seamlessly to a full band, but only when the musicians knew how to listen to him.
The 1960s were pivotal. While American popular music was moving toward pop and Motown, Europe, and especially the UK, was looking backward. They were obsessed with the raw, authentic sound of American blues.
It was a huge cultural moment. And this phenomenon pulled John Lee Hooker from the domestic blues circuit right onto the global stage.
And the key mechanism for this cultural transfer was the annual American Folk Blues Festival.
Yes, that festival was incredibly influential. Starting in 1962, Hooker gained significant new exposure by touring Europe as part of this series. This introduced his raw electric delta sound directly to a new generation of British musicians who were, forming the bedrock of British rock and roll at that very moment.
The Rolling Stones, the Animals, the Yardbirds.
All of them were listening intently, and we see the immediate commercial effect in the charts, which proves the UK audience embraced him quickly.
Right, the song Dimples.
Exactly. Dimples, which was a modest 1956 U.S. release, suddenly becomes a hit single on the UK singles charts 8 years later, in 1964. The British invasion bands were already adapting his sound, but the British public was buying the original source material.
This exposure to the rock world catalyzed the most commercially defining phase of his career, the cross-genre collaborations. He became this authentic blues figurehead, the electric boogeyman that rock stars revered and sought out.
One of his earliest collaborations was with the British blues rock band, the Groundhogs. They clearly understood and revered his unique style. They were just eager to learn from the master.
But the true commercial breakthrough came in 1970 with the album Hooker and Heat, which he recorded with the American boogie rock group Canned Heat.
And that felt like such a natural fit. Canned Heat's repertoire was already heavily influenced by and included adaptations of Hooker's songs. It wasn't a forced pairing, it was a musical reunion.
And the impact was enormous.
Huge. Hooker and Heat was the first album of his to ever reach the Billboard charts. It peaked at number 78 on the Billboard 200. This showed that the mainstream rock audience was finally ready to embrace the source material directly.
That album really created a blueprint for the rest of his career, didn't it?
It did. Other successful albums quickly followed, like Endless Boogie in 1971 and Never Get Out of These Blues Alive in 1972. What's remarkable is the caliber of the guest musicians who lined up to play with him. Steve Miller, Elvin Bishop, and the great Van Morrison.
So, if rock musicians were used to playing to a strict metronome, how did these later collaborations work? Did Hooker finally adapt his tempo to fit the rock bands? Or did the rock bands, who were his fans, adapt to his unique fluid rhythm?
It was a bit of a combination, but the sources suggest that predominantly the rock stars adapted to him. By the 1970s, rock and roll had become looser, more improvisational than the rigid structures of the 50s.
Right.
And guys like Morrison and Santana, they recognized that the magic of Hooker's sound was his fluid time. So they approached the collaboration with deep respect, treating him like an elder statesman whose tempo must be followed. It elevated him from a peer to a spiritual guide.
And we absolutely have to discuss his iconic cinematic moment, which brought his music to an entirely new, massive generation.
That would be the 1980 film The Blues Brothers.
Of course.
Hooker appears as a street musician, playing Boom Boom during that chaotic police chase scene through Chicago. It was just a perfect piece of casting, a moment of pure blues authenticity cutting through the comedy and chaos.
It solidified his image as the enduring, undeniable boogeyman in pop culture.
While those early collaborations were successful, the late career commercial peaks he achieved in the late 80s and 90s were truly staggering. He became a genuine music industry heavyweight, a cultural fixture that spanned generations.
And it all started with The Healer in 1989.
The Healer was the defining event of his late career. He recorded it with massive stars like Carlos Santana and Bonnie Raitt. The album wasn't just a commercial success, it was critically acclaimed. It earned him his first Grammy win for the song I'm in the Mood, which featured Bonnie Raitt.
And the 1990s continued this remarkable chart dominance, confirming that his unique sound could succeed in the MTV era. We have Mr. Lucky in 1991, Chill Out in 1995, and Don't Look Back in 1997.
And these records, they just reinforced that collaborative formula. They featured continued partnerships with superstars, Van Morrison, Santana, Los Lobos, and countless others. By this point, collaborating with John Lee Hooker was a major status symbol for any rock or blues artist.
He was universally respected as a living legend.
Absolutely. And one of his biggest chart successes came from revisiting the song that defined his VJ period.
Boom Boom.
His re-recording of Boom Boom, which served as the title track for his 1992 album, featured guitarist Jimmy Vaughan. That track became his highest charting single in the UK, reaching number 16.
It just proves that the driving rhythm boogie still had explosive commercial power decades after he first recorded it. It wasn't nostalgia, it was enduring quality.
The story of John Lee Hooker's life is really one of hard-won success. The sharecropper's son, who ran away from home at 14, ended his life in comfort, receiving the financial and professional recognition he deserved.
He certainly did. He owned 5 houses in his later life, including ones in Los Altos, Redwood City, and Long Beach, California.
And that's a powerful testament to the financial success he eventually achieved after surviving decades of contractual exploitation.
He died peacefully in his sleep at his Los Altos home on June 21, 2001. A man who started his life in the profound uncertainty of the Delta ended it in comfort.
And fittingly, even his death brought the birth date controversy full circle. Depending on whether you trusted the official paperwork or this historical census evidence, he died at the age of either 83 or 88.
Either way, it was a long life, richly dedicated to music.
Regardless of the exact year of his birth, the massive timeline of his contribution is clear. And the music establishment eventually recognized him with a long-deserved list of formal honors and inductions.
His institutional recognition really confirms his role as a crucial figure in the history of American music.
He was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame in 1980. Critically, he crossed over to the broader genre, securing a spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1991. He went in with icons like Laverne Baker and the Byrds in the class of 1991.
And the recognition went far beyond music halls of fame, didn't it? It reached the highest levels of government acknowledgement for cultural significance.
In 1983, he received the National Heritage Fellowship. That's the United States government's highest honor in the folk and traditional arts, awarded by the National Endowment for the Arts. It's a powerful statement, recognizing him not just as a musician, but as a vital carrier of American cultural tradition.
Plus, you see the other signs of lasting cultural impact. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and induction into the Mississippi Musicians Hall of Fame, finally welcoming the runaway son home.
His late-career Grammy history perfectly encapsulates his ability to bridge tradition and modernity. He earned 4 competitive wins, all for albums released late in his career, all driven by those successful collaborations.
And the categories themselves demonstrated his range.
In 1990, he won Best Traditional Blues Recording for I'm in the Mood with Bonnie Raitt. In 1995, he secured Best Traditional Blues Album for Chill Out. And then, in 1998, he scored this fantastic double win for the album Don't Look Back. He won Best Traditional Blues Recording. And he won Best Pop Collaboration with Vocals for the title track with Van Morrison.
That pop collaboration win is particularly insightful, isn't it? It proves that his music wasn't just being listened to by purists. It had enough infectious appeal to be considered mainstream pop.
He managed to move from the segregated race record charts to collaborating on a pop collaboration Grammy win. It's an incredible arc. And finally, his legacy was secured when he received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2000, ensuring he was celebrated while he was still alive and performing.
But as we often say, the most profound measure of a musician's legacy isn't the trophies or the plaques, it's the specific songs that actively shaped the history of music itself.
And the evidence here is just indisputable. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame maintains a list of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll, and 2 John Lee Hooker songs are enshrined there. The elemental Boogie Chillin' and the driving Boom Boom.
And Boogie Chillin' also earned a spot on the Recording Industry Association of America's list of the songs of the century, a list reserved for music deemed historically significant to 20th century American culture.
And this connects back perfectly to our initial analysis of his musical style. Hooker's great contribution was taking that raw electric drone he developed and codifying the driving rhythm boogie style.
And we have to differentiate this from boogie woogie.
We must. Boogie woogie was the popular 1930s and 40s piano music. Highly rhythmic, yes, but often harmonically complex and very structured.
So Hooker's boogie was stripped down, simpler. It focused entirely on the repetitive guitar riff and the vocal phrasing, often ignoring the 12-bar structure entirely.
Exactly. That simple, repetitive, primal electric rhythm, that signature shuffle, was the critical groundwork. It was the blueprint for so much of early electric R&B and the rawest elements of early rock and roll. He proved that complexity wasn't necessary for power.
He reduced the blues to its most essential hypnotic form.
And by doing that, he ensured that when rock and roll emerged, it had a primitive, electric, powerful rhythm section already waiting for it.
He wasn't just a bluesman. He was an unintentional architect of the rock aesthetic. He was the electric boogeyman, and the entire history of electrified music that followed owes him an immeasurable debt for making the rhythm fluid and foundational.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
We've traced John Lee Hooker from a sharecropper's cabin in the Delta, likely born in 1912 and raised in strict poverty, to a massively successful rock collaborator who owned 5 houses in California. The core takeaway from this deep dive is the almost unbelievable duality of his life.
He was the ultimate synthesis of American musical history. He took the deep, raw, acoustic Delta drone that he learned from William Moore, that modal one-chord fixation, and transformed it.
Transformed it through electrification and his personalized, non-standard, utterly unique rhythm.
And by forging that path in the blues, he created something instantly accessible, infectious, and easily adapted by the rock and roll world, ensuring his music would influence generations long after he was gone.
We discussed how his unique timing was so challenging that he had to rely on stomping a wooden pallet to make his first hit, Boogie Chillin'. He was a man who had to invent his own system because the established system couldn't handle his genius.
And this leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider, tying together that artistic necessity with the economic reality. John Lee Hooker was famous for inventing a whole who's who of pseudonyms: Texas Slim, Johnny Lee, Birmingham Sam, specifically to evade restrictive contracts and secure basic session payment just to survive.
So, if the music industry had properly recognized and rewarded blues artists in the 1950s, if they had allowed them to earn fair royalties and operate freely under a modern fair system, he wouldn't have needed to hide. Would we have ever gotten to know Texas Slim or Birmingham Sam?
Or would the entire trajectory of his musical output, the sheer volume and variety of records he released across those dozens of labels during that chaotic period, have been dramatically different?
Something to mull over as you explore his expansive and wonderfully contradictory discography. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll see you next time.